Hello, welcome back everyone. Going to go over the HTML code for my home control. So obviously we got the title right there. I'm interested in what's going on here with the page first, and then we'll hit the JavaScript and the CSS later. So as you can see, I mentioned earlier that we have an onload function. It's actually called setup, and it runs this section of the code, which basically lays out the buttons on the right hand side of the screen that I can click between back and forth, and then whichever one I click on, well, obviously it starts on the garage page, which would load this one here, garage page. Scroll up a little bit for you, and so I lay out the garage div with these other divs: interior lights, the spare, left and right doors. So there's really not a lot of code to it. And as I mentioned, I'm throwing in the two-letter code for the ID. Here's one. There's another one here. And the BG is hiding the trademark, or not the just the registered symbol, circled R, that I told you is the relay thing. I found it was kind of quirky, but I had to have a space after it before the end div tag. So just a little FYI, in case you're wondering why, if you use this, why it's kind of haywire. So that's pretty straightforward on the garage. Again, the doors TX for the ID. That one is the hidden ID, or hidden div, even though it's not hidden. I'm using it as the hidden, what do you want to call that? The hidden data that I'm sending. So then if you go to any of these other, I call them pages. It's all within the same page. Let's start with that. But my basement div and all these other divs are initially hidden. And when the onload function goes through its thing, it actually starts the JavaScript which says unhide the garage div. So in the future, I could easily change which page I want to go to. I call it landing on, whichever page I want to land on. But as is, it's the garage. So let's go to the basement, because this is the one that was in the first video I did about showing you how it works. And I was playing with the workshop light right here. Again, two-letter div, and that's actually the div with the HTML. So it doesn't. This is line by line. If you look at the actual web page, you have the word workshop in a single div, and then immediately after that, the next div is this button div, which says on click, and I initiate it, like when I first log onto the page, everything shows up as unavailable, meaning the data hasn't been sent yet. And then obviously the registered mark is hidden regardless. So it's just, if you look at it, it's just repetitive. It's an area with the ID. Area, ID. And then I did put in, for instance, right here, not that it's all that important, but there's a separate div here labeled den, and then immediately below that, den ceiling light and the outlet. So those are tied together. There's another one. Bathroom lights, exhaust fan, shower fan. Shower light, I should say. So the HTML part of it's pretty straightforward. If we come up here, let's do style, because that's straightforward too. What I did is I made a bunch of divs that start over so far, and the top of the div is here, and I just kept reusing it. Depending on the page I was on, I always used div, I think it's this one. It's 75 pixels down from the top. So I reference, put the basement first div shows up there, second div at R3, fourth, and so on, for however many divs I have on that particular section, or page as I refer to them as. And you can see it goes all the way down to 24, and that's for probably the first floor, or maybe the second floor. I'm not exactly sure. In fact, I actually have to refine this, because there might be some of these that are no longer used, again, from so many different revisions. And then how the initial, well, obviously the background body is that gray color. For me, that's 170, 170, 170. and then the rest of the remaining type stuff, the font sizes and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty straightforward. So now initially I tried to set up a separate CSS file and a separate JavaScript file, and I was having problems getting them to load. I did everything it says on the web about, you have to go up in the top in the header section here and put down your JavaScript file, the directory, and all that kind of stuff. And I was doing that, and it worked on my Textastic, but when I put it on the Arduino, for some reason it didn't work, and I know it was me, because other people can do it. But I sat back and I thought about it for a minute, and I said, well, this information here, all this information, was basically over in the CSS file on the SD card. Well, I'm going to need that information, and since it's all basically one page, just different parts showing, what difference does it make? It's the amount of information is not changing. So whether I send it in a separate file or not, in this particular case, didn't make any difference. It's still all the same data, information, whatever you want to call it. And in fact, the overall file size is reduced by a minimal amount because I'm not putting up here, reference the CSS file, blah, 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 the cascading style. You know what I mean? And then the same thing with the JavaScript. So let's close the style tag. The JavaScript is the same thing. Rather than having in the head referencing the file on the SD card for the JavaScript, I tried, like I said, it didn't work either. So I put it right here, right in the HTML as a script tag. I got a bunch of different functions. Let's go to the setup function because that's where we start. I load a couple of variables, or I should say I set them up, and then these variables, the capital BAP is the basement, so I'm getting the basement information, all the other different floors. It loads up great. The tracker is so when I hit the back button it goes back to the page that I was on, so it's nothing really super spectacular or fun. And then let's go down here to the garage function that gets called on. Yeah, garage function right here. That's the first thing I do. So if I change this to any of the other ones, then that's the page that you'll see. That's the part that you'll see first. So then what actually happens there is I say make the garage dot hidden attribute false. In other words, show it. And then also the back button is hidden. And I should go through that more. I'll show you when the time comes. That the back button only shows up when I go to the admin page. So if we go to admin, the very bottom one is the back button hidden false. Otherwise the back button's always hidden. Because I don't need it all the time. I don't care. I'm going to flip from section to section. I'm never going to go back. Excuse me. So so that's the setup. Those are the different pages, and away we go. So I mentioned that we have a window.setInterval function going on. And this is where the magic happens here. So now initially, all this stuff from here down, you wouldn't have. But as I said, I put it into a substring. Again, probably not real efficient, probably not real clean, but it does work. So I have it set up for, if I go to the bottom of this, as I mentioned, it's every second. Every 2 seconds. No wonder why the page is slow. So every 2 seconds, every 2,000 milliseconds, that interval time shoots off this request. And then Arduino finds this and it sends back the data. The data gets sent back in right here in the response text. Actually, it gets sent back in response text as an attribute of this, meaning this, the current response. So I take that information, which is that long string of ID, 2-letter ID, true or false, 2-letter ID, true or false, or in the case of the garage doors, the letters representing the colors that it should produce. I'll show you that actual if-then statement in a minute. So now I've got that whole long string stored in this variable here, sData. I come through, I set a variable called item A, equal to the substring of the text of the character starting at 0, the first two. Then I put the substring of the starting at 2, which is really the third one, right, because it's 0 indexed, and I only want the first or a single character, which is either true or false. Then we go through and we say the substring, the third position, which is really the fourth. Grab those two, put those into this variable. It's an abbreviation for me, which is indicator. Indicator A, indicator B, indicator C, so forth and so on. And then finally, I grab the fifth character, which is actually 0 index, so it's the sixth character, again, true or false. We do that over and over and over for all those things that I sent. And then I made myself some notes. For instance, here, you can see I'm only grabbing SData substring for the first two, which we're calling the item, capital letter L, and the status, true or false, and that's it. And I'm grabbing only the status for the front gate and the rear gate, the garage door opener. This is where the Y, R, G, E, O end up. They end up as this number one character, I'm sorry, this one here, in the N status. Now that has nothing to do with the Arduino hidden value. It doesn't matter because it goes through the internet, and it's more of it's in position 230 and it's only one character. So then I know that my, let's do right garage door is OST. So if we come down and we look for capital OST, there we go, the right garage door. So I say if capital OST is equal to R, which is what Arduino sent, or any of these other ones, take the document ID, which is the O item, which we grabbed from the first two characters of that same if-then, that same substring, set the background color to these. So again, not real difficult to do, but it does this whole sequence every time. Every 2 seconds, it sends out the request for the response text, which is that whole long string, puts in this variable, substrings it out based on these numbers, turns around, runs the if-then statements for each of the div IDs and their condition. Not rocket science. And that's all inside this request, the interval timer, which, let's go back up here. So it's an anonymous function that picks a number, math random, makes a new XML HTTP request, shoots it over to Arduino. When it's ready and it's okay, it sends back the text and it's happy. I'm going to close that one. That was really long. So what I didn't really go over very clear before, here, let's go to Garage since we're on that topic. So on the right garage door, I have this click, and it's on click, and on this one it's different because I'm actually clicking on the text, right garage door. Whereas for the interior lights, I'm clicking after the exterior lights, and I'm clicking on where it would normally be unavailable, but once that interval timer loads, it's going to say on or off depending on the condition that the Arduino sends out. So I would click here, but on the right and left garage doors I actually click on the word. And what happens is I start a function that I call OO, which stands for on off, and I send it the parameter of 36. So let's close that, and go to function OO. And then again, I'm not clean on my code. I tried some other things that didn't work, so I just stayed with what worked. I'm taking the X, I'm passing it into a variable called rec number. We come down to 36. It says if the rec number is equal to 36, point equals capital action, lowercase j, Then I turn around and I take the switch point function and I send it point. So I'm sending it this string. Now, let's go find out what switch point function is. Right up above. Switch point function turns around, sends out a different request, another XML HTTP request. And I send, it's a GET request. I send it S, which is that string that we just said. We pass it in here. It sends a GET request with that string plus the no cache, and asynchronous is true. It really took me a while to understand what all this is doing, but once I got it, good to go. So that's it.